Have you ever heard someone say it's just the fundamentals when talking about your marksmanship abilities? They make it sound so simple, right? Like this is just information that gets uploaded into your brain the very first time you pick up a firearm. It can be a frustrating statement, especially if no one's ever taken the time to sit you down and teach you what those fundamentals actually are. You know, like, what am I actually messing up here? You can't just say fundamentals and then walk away, Greg. I don't know what the fundamentals actually are. Look, here's the deal. When someone says it's just fundamentals, they're saying it because firearms are precision engineered tools. That's why we can say something like this is a sub-MOA firearm, or this caliber can reach X distance at Y velocity. We can consistently hit these precision numbers and even walk rounds out to 4 and 5 kilometers with a ballistic computer because the firearms are designed specifically to push a projectile through a barrel at a high velocity. If we're doing our part, the firearm is usually going to be more accurate than we are. So let's start by breaking them down in their classic order, starting with stance as the foundation for stability, then grip for control, sight alignment as an aiming baseline, sight picture for target placement in relation to the actual sights, breathing to minimize movement, trigger control to avoid disturbing the firearm, and then follow through to make sure that we confirm and then recover and get ready for the next shot. All right, first up, let's talk about stance. This is the position of the body as the foundation for stability and alignment. It doesn't matter if you're prone, sitting, kneeling, or standing here. Your overall body position and stance needs to be one that is comfortable and relaxed. Now keep in mind, shooting is an always evolving form of martial arts. No matter what anyone says about it, over time, the schools and trains of thought in shooting have and are always going to continue to change. I'm not going to sit here in 2025 and tell you that any one stance is the best way to shoot. We've all seen the evolution of shooting stances over the years, and it's always changing. It's always moving. So I'm not going to tell you one's the best. What I will tell you, however, is that you want your body stance to bring your natural point of aim directly to the target. You shouldn't feel like you're muscling the firearm onto the target, and if you are doing that, you may have already found the cheek in your marksmanship medal. The sight should rest naturally on the target that you're engaging, and you should not be tensing your muscles to move the sights onto the target. Bone support is paramount here. This is using your body's skeletal structure for firmness rather than muscle tension. For example, in the kneeling position, you can rest your elbow on your knee in a manner that achieves a locked and comfortable position, and this should allow you to find a natural point of aim directly on your intended target without you needing to move a bunch of the muscles in your back, shoulders, and arms to get the weapon on target. Now, training stance is something that you should be doing every single time that you're dry firing. Recording yourself is a really good way to find out if your stance is a problem while you're shooting. At first, you might find some positions slightly uncomfortable, especially if you're not a super flexible person and you're trying something like the Marine Corps sitting position for the first time. But I promise over time, you're going to get better as your body becomes more flexible and relaxed in these positions. Next time you're at a course, make sure you talk to your trainer or your instructor specifically about your stance as well. They'll probably be able to point out some things to you that you weren't catching while you were working on your own. It's always better to get a coach. Next up, we got to talk about grip. This applies to both handguns and rifles. This fundamental is the firm contact and pressure distribution between your hands and the weapon system. Whether it's a two-handed hold on a handgun or one with a forward support on a rifle system, the idea here is about creating a stable, consistent platform that minimizes unwanted movement during the firing process itself. The purpose of practicing grip as a fundamental is to ensure that the system stays secure without disturbing the alignment of the firearm, allowing for more precise manipulation of the weapon system. Just like stance, grip approaches have evolved in marksmanship over time, with variations depending on the weapon system or the context in which you're actually shooting. I.e., it's going to be different if you're shooting a handgun versus if you're shooting a rifle or you're shooting a machine gun. Your hand's placement is one of the keys to grip. Position the V between your thumb and your index finger high on the pistol grip directly behind the trigger, wrapping your finger and thumb around naturally so that the trigger finger can contact the trigger without any strain. If you're a carpenter with a non-traditional hand setup, you might need a bit of extra work here. Your support hand, or your non-dominant hand, your left hand for us righties, positioning adds forward stability to the rifle and pistols alike. Often you're going to be gripping the fore end or the handguard on a rifle, and for pistols, you're going to rotate about 30 degrees to overlap and fill in any gaps in the handgun to give you better control of the weapon's recoil. Your pressure distribution and consistency are what we're looking for with grip. In a perfect world, you want to always try to apply a firm but not tense rearward pull with the dominant hand to seat the system solidly. You might not always be able to do this, but again, this is where dry fire comes into play. Check out this video that CJ put together with a now Grandmaster USPSA shooter to learn a little bit about how the best in the game practice until they just can't get it wrong. Mastering your grip is something that's definitely going to come in handy a little bit later. Sight alignment and sight picture are the next two fundamentals, and I'm actually going to group these together here just for the sake of simplicity. These are really your core for getting the rifle or handgun on target, but there's going to be a big difference in how both work depending on if you're shooting with iron sights or you're shooting with some kind of optic. For the purpose of this today, we're going to assume that you're working with your iron sights and not some kind of optic system. I'm a firm believer that brilliance begins with the basics, and irons are truly the most basic form of analog shooting, and they're also probably the most budget-friendly way to get into this. Sight alignment is actually just the lineup between the front sight post and the rear sight, and your sight picture works when you put those two together on the target. The purpose is to get a repeatable aiming point with the natural point of aim we talked about earlier in stance. Your alignment establishes the system's direction, and the sight picture ensures that it hits the intended spot on the target. Small errors are going to magnify here a lot over distances, so keep that in mind. Your rifle might be sub-MOA, but that doesn't always mean that you're a sub-MOA shooter just yet. This is why the fundamentals of marksmanship are so important. For iron sights, alignment centers the front post tip vertically and horizontally in the rear aperture with equal height and equal light all the way around it. Sight picture then sets that on the target center mass, or whatever your point of aim is, focusing sharply on that front sight post. Remember this adage: clear tip, blurry target. If you're target focused through your iron sights, you're going to struggle with your sight picture as a fundamental. Stock or cheek weld will set you up for success. If you've ever heard that term and wondered what it actually meant, here's the deal. This is the point of firm contact between your cheek and the stock or frame of the rifle, and ensures that you have the same positioning every time you aim. For consistency, this is extremely important, as changing the cheek placement can actually alter how you perceive the sights from shot to shot, and it might actually shift your point of impact downrange if you're constantly changing where you're resting your cheek and looking through the sights. We also need to talk about eye relief during these fundamentals too, because a bad or inconsistent cheek weld can mix you up. Eye relief is the distance between your aiming eye and the rear sight aperture, or the optic lens. It varies by individual size, position, and weapon system type, but getting eye relief wrong can make the aperture appear too small or your target too hard to acquire. This can also really mess you up if you're just getting into optics for the first time, because if you're too close, you might have the privilege of learning about what the term scope bite means.
Did you hit yourself in the eye?
Yeah.
All right, now that you're done screaming from getting smacked in the eye socket by your optic, let's talk about breath control, or breathing itself, as a fundamental. I want to do an experiment together, just you and me. I want you to take a deep breath in and hold it once your lungs are full. Now slowly let that air out of your lungs. Doesn't matter if you do it through your nose or through your mouth, just slowly let it out. Did you feel how much your body moved? Did you see how much mine moved? This is all excess movement in our body that impacts our natural point of aim through our own individual personal contact with the weapon system. In regards to marksmanship, breath control is the regulation of your respiratory cycles to completely minimize your body's movement. You have to remember, guys, we are physically making several points of contact with our precision engineered tools. Every time we breathe while aiming down the sights of our rifle, we are making micro adjustments to the barrel and impacting our point of aim, which downrange means the round isn't going to hit where we want. Some schools of thought might tell you that it's best to hold your breath right before you shoot, and that's not a bad way of going about it in high-stress situations. But let's work on the fundamentals themselves and not get too deep into the rabbit hole of breath control and crazy breathing techniques. For most people, the normal respiratory cycle runs about 4 to 5 seconds for both inhaling and exhaling. Throughout that cycle, you have one critical point in which your body is fully relaxed and you can achieve what we refer to as our natural respiratory pause. This is part of the normal human breathing rhythm, which involves roughly 1 to 1.5 seconds of inhalation and 1 to 1.5 seconds of exhalation. After you finish exhaling and right before you start the next inhale, you'll hit that golden second of respiratory pause, which is the prime spot to pull your trigger and send a round downrange. Now that I've tricked you into breathing manually, let me talk to you about trigger control just for 1 second. This is the proper and appropriate manipulation of the trigger without disturbing the firearm or your sights. I want you to remember this fundamental specifically because this one gets a lot of people, and there's a reason that we've talked about triggers so much on this channel over the years. If our customer service guy Kevin had $1 for every single time someone called in shooting low and left, well, he'd probably be retired and not working here by now. Our objective with the trigger is to slowly squeeze it straight back into the rear until the firearm intentionally discharges. This, combined with all of our previous fundamentals, will maximize the engineering of our firearm and let the firearm do its job without any additional negative inputs from us. The main approach for good trigger control on a semi-automatic firearm uses the pad of our index finger, specifically where the fingerprint starts to curl, to start applying straight back pressure to the trigger. With a 2-stage trigger like a Rise Iconic T22 or a Geisley G2S Combat, you'll pull the first stage out of the trigger until you reach the trigger wall. Then you'll continue to apply that rearward pressure until the trigger actually breaks and the firearm discharges. But with a single stage trigger like a Timney Impact or the Trigger Tech Diamond, you're not going to have that initial take up whatsoever. You'll simply apply rearward pressure until the trigger breaks and the firearm discharges. Now, there's a few pitfalls and traps that are common reoccurring themes with trigger control. If you're not seeing consistent groups or your groups are consistently not hitting where you're aiming, I'd start by troubleshooting with these first. First, you've got jerking or slapping the trigger. You want a slow and steady squeeze, guys, for proper trigger discipline. The way that I was taught this is that it should almost be a surprise every single time the firearm goes off. You can correct this one pretty easily if you want to. Just slow down, dial your speed back, and take your time to ensure that you're doing it right. The second big killer here is anticipating your recoil or flinching. This one gets a lot of new shooters especially, or people shooting a firearm for the very first time. You essentially delete all of your previous fundamentals here with a pre-ignition push, destroying everything else that you've been doing prior to taking the shot. This one also has a really simple fix too. Let your buddy load your magazine with a random number of rounds. This flinch is going to present itself pretty clearly when you think you're about to shoot and there's no rounds in the magazine. You might also have what's known as a sympathetic squeeze, where you're tensing up your entire hand and pushing the muzzle off target, or inconsistent pressure in your shooting that can be caused by fatigue might also do this. Last comment on triggers, guys. My arch nemesis on this fundamental is finger placement on the trigger. Remember, you don't want to go up too deep on your trigger. This can throw off the angle of the trigger pull and actually mess up where your shot lands downrange. I spent a good portion of my professional shooting career working with automatic firearms, which have an entirely different school of thought behind trigger control, and this for me caused me to develop training scars in the context of shooting with semi-automatic firearms. It's something that I've been struggling and compensating for pretty much my entire professional shooting career. But if you've seen footage on this channel, you've probably noticed just how deep I go with my trigger finger when I'm shooting, and that's something that I've been working on. Our final fundamental is shot follow through and recovery. This is a continuation of all the prior fundamentals after the shot is taken up to and including watching where that round impacts downrange. Next time you pull the trigger out in the range, I want you to hold that position with the trigger pinned back to the rear for a full second. Then slowly release the trigger until you hear and feel the audible clunk of the trigger resetting. This is important for a few reasons, especially in practice. First, you're bringing your sights back on target using your natural point of aim. Second, you're not rushing through all of the previous fundamentals. Third, you're building the ideal conditions for your follow-on shot. Last, you're mentally imprinting the fundamental process into your subconscious, allowing yourself to physically and mentally master the basic fundamentals of marksmanship. I firmly believe that everyone, even Greg, has the ability to master fundamental marksmanship, and that mastery starts by continuously building on everything that we've been talking about today. Remember, stance, grip, sight alignment, sight picture, breathing, trigger control, and follow through. In order for you to be able to calibrate the human element of the firearm you've spent so much time building out in your range, you need to strengthen your core marksmanship muscles. It isn't always fun or sexy, but guys, brilliance begins with the basics. If you want to know how your AR-15 actually works so you can further master your basic understanding of the platform, check out this video on the cycle of operations. We'll see you over there.